So this is my updated patch 8.17 tier list. I had one before this for 8.16, but the audio corrupted, so I never uploaded that video. Hopefully it doesn't do the same for this one. Not a lot has really changed, so I'm just gonna go through each one of these. I've retuned this multiple times, so this should be relatively accurate. So I'm gonna go top from bottom, starting at OP, going to the worst one. So starting off, we have Darius as the OP tier in top lane. Darius is probably one of the strongest duelists in top lane next to Fiora. His laning phase is relatively simple. He has good sustain in the late game, especially when his Q, when he hits multiple targets, as it helps him heal most of his health back. He doesn't have the best engage, but that doesn't mean he's not going to get on top of you. Getting Demon's Plate and some boots on this guy means that in later team fights, he can more or less snowball as long as he gets a single kill with his ultimate or gets 5 stacks, which is less likely. In a later game, he can one-shot most people, as his ult does around 1000 plus true damage, so he's definitely a massive threat. And his laning phase is really powerful as well, as once he reaches level 6, he can kill most people, and before that he can still duel most people. His level 1 power spike is not insane, but it is stronger than most other champions. Garen is similar to Darius, where his late game is extremely powerful. However, he is much more easy to kill in the laning phase and later in the game. He falls off harder. He's single target for most cases except for his spin, but his spin shouldn't really be killing you late game unless you have no protections at all. If you're his marked target and he has Predator, you're basically going to die the millisecond he presses his Q. So look forward to that. If you have GA and a team to help you out, you should be able to shred him. Champs like Vayne counter him really hard, but he still has some of the most durability out of all top laners with his W and a tenacity. So he will still get on top of you, and he will do a lot of damage. Make sure you have people back you up, unless you're playing Vayne, in which case you can probably 1v1 him. Vladimir is next up on the OP tier list. This is for Vlad mid lane, basically. His top lane is not as prevalent as it was before, because he's pretty easy to kill in the early game. But when it comes to the late game, he'll basically one-shot anyone in the game with his full combo. His burst damage is insane, especially when you have Electrocute, but you can also take Predator to get into team fights. Overall, his sustain and laning and his just really powerful late game makes him a great pick. Then we have Riven. Riven is one of the ones it's situational for people. Not everyone can play her to the full potential, but as long as you can play Riven in a way where you do use your auto attack cancels and build her properly, you can beat most people later in the game. Her damage output is really high if you can do your full combo, and her laning phase is actually pretty decent unless you're going up against some of the other champions in this list, such as Garen or Darius, but even a really good Riven player can beat those if played properly. I have Evelynn up here in the OP for the jungle, but most people would disagree with this. The reason I have her here is because of how easy it is to completely one-shot someone and how simple her ganks are. Her W mark, if you use it properly, you can basically secure a gank on anyone as long as they don't waste their summoners. But even if they do waste their summoners, you still have a pretty decent chance of killing them. Later in the game, once you reach level 6, you'll be able to solo most champions, as long as they don't have insane MR by that point. And later in the game, you can essentially kill anyone simply by walking up using your E and ulting, especially ADCs. Her ability to completely destroy people in team fights is really good. Her ult alone, when people are full health, does about like 600 damage, scaling to a couple thousand or so if the people have no magic resist and she is full build, because her ult scales really well. So later in the game, she probably has the most presence in comparison to other assassins, especially other. Alright, audio check cooking me again, but I think you get the point. She's one of the best assassins later in the game. We're going to Udyr. I probably ranked him a little bit too high. He's not super OP, but he still is probably the best jungler if you can play, especially in the lower elo. His damage with his Tiger Stance is almost unmatched in early games. He can duel basically any champion in the game as long as you can strafe properly and get the DPS stacking. His shred ability is really strong. If you build him properly and play him properly, you can definitely get into high elo really simple. His mechanics are not super difficult, so it's not hard to master the champion, and it allows you to increase your micro and macro play. Kindred is one of the champions who actually deserves to be in the OP spot for the jungle tier. Her early game sucks. Basically, anyone can kill her unless Kindred's really good and can strafe really well. But later in the game, Kindred can completely shred anyone. She's almost like a Caitlyn Tristana, in where her attack range when you get stacks up is extremely long range. So in the hands of a proper player, Kindred can demolish people. And same thing goes with Akali. Akali's not super hard to play, to be honest, but her damage and her uplift potential is extremely high. So in the laning phase, the second she reaches level 2, just like the old Akali, a really good Akali player can go and 100-0 you simply with that. When she gets to level 6, she can duel most people, and when she gets later in the game, her presence in team fights really well. Wukong is similar. They recently buffed him. I have no clue why. Wukong was already one of the best assassins and the easiest assassins to play. You can go him somewhere like top lane. Apparently his mid lane is really good for some people. So once you reach level 6, he can destroy most people. Later in the game, his ulti can just inhale everyone in team fights. So if you play him properly, you'll be able to snowball really hard. Aurelion Sol's in a similar position as Wukong, except he's not as simple to play. A proper Aurelion Sol main would be roaming most of the game to get their other lanes to be fed. A fed Aurelion Sol is relatively easy to kill as long as you're playing an assassin or someone who can get inside of him really easily. But that being said, Aurelion Sol probably has one of the most potential in the game to completely carry with, because you can get your bot lane snowballing and your top lane snowballing all while destroying your mid lane, which most champions can't do. His damage is not that low either. His full combo actually is one of the higher DPSs in the game. Talking about high DPS, we have Zoe, who's getting sort of buff this patch. She's basically gonna one-shot you. And then we have Brand, who's basically the same thing, except you can miss everything and just press ulti and kill someone. Now we have Twist of Fate. Twist of Fate's similar to Aurelion Sol, where he can roam, but he needs his ulti for this, and his late game is pretty powerful, as you just have to right-click someone with your card to basically one-shot them. Not super hard to play, but he's not super easy either. Then we have Talon. Talon's probably the only AD assassin who deserves to be up here, besides Pyke, but he doesn't really count. Talon's landing is pretty easy. You get Ignite, you get Electrocute, you get level 2. People usually die with your WQ combo. A really good Talon player can play around him in team fights and actually be useful, but lower on, people won't be able to optimize his play. I still have him the OP tier simply because he has potential to be one of the most powerful assassins in the game, as he has that invisibility from his ultimate and the ability to shred essentially any target. I have Xerath up here. Most people wouldn't expect him to be up here, but for a mid laner, he has a lot of damage. His abilities, all of them scale really well, and his ultimate is the main reason. So I compare Xerath to Vel'Koz a lot, simply because they're both really long range, and they're all skill shot related. Except the thing is, Xerath's ultimate is arguably one of the easiest things in the game to completely shred people with. Easy as in, it does a ton of damage, not in the way that it is to hit. It's hard to hit, but as long as you can hit them, you will be killing essentially any target the second you reach level 6, as long as you don't suck ass. Then we have Jhin. Jhin's like arguably the best ADC in the game in comparison to the ones that are doing well right now. He's supposed to be immobile, but he is mobile because of Stormrazor and things like that. They gave him Whimsy when he crits. And his damage later on is really strong as well. He has low attack speed, but it doesn't mean he can't kill you. He can auto attack straight. This mic, holy crap. Where was I? Yeah, Jhin. So he can auto attack, strafe you, and shred you late game. He can kill a lot of tanks as well because Infinity is true damage. If you're squishy, he can probably two-shot you, but you can also do the same to him because he's also relatively squishy. Lulu's, in my opinion, the best support in the game next to Taric because she has so many buffs in her kit and the ability to keep almost anyone alive, which Taric does an even better job at because it gives them CC with his E along with the ultimate, which makes them literally unkillable. And then we have Pyke. Everyone underestimates Pyke. The thing is, his ulti is super powerful. His passive is probably the best thing in the game when it comes to passives. That is essentially the sole reason why Pyke is able to be so high tier, because he could take tons of harassed while being extremely aggressive, which you need to do in order to win lane. And when you start doing go with him, you'll be able to solo carry games, even though you're a support, which most other supports can't do. Going into the S plus tier, we have Gangplank. Gangplank is probably one of the better top laners for low elo, as long as you can do your barrel combos. I like playing him AP, but that's not essentially the best build. The best build right now is sort of a tanky kind of Gangplank build. A lot of high elo people use Spear Facade and such on him. His damage is high with his ultimate and his E-crit, and he has a lot of potential and later in the game. He can't really solo carry, but he does have a lot of power in his kit. Camille is one of the easiest champions to play for jungle. Her ganking is super strong with her E because it essentially can be used from any of the walls in the lane to reach into the center. Her laning in top lane, if you want to play her there, is also pretty decent. Her damage is strong and she can dodge a lot of abilities with her ult. Also, her true damage with her Q scales really well later into the game. She has one of the higher dueling potentials, but not the best in comparison to something like Darius or Garen. Camille probably would lose unless the Camille is really good at strafing. Then we have Jax. I feel like Jax might be in the OP tier, but I put him here just for precaution. He has probably the best dueling potential in the game because of his Counter-Strike and his DPS with his entire kit. His passive gives him essentially a Nashor's Tooth worth of attack speed, maybe a little bit less. Add that onto his W's, auto attack reset, Titanic auto attack reset, and his ultimate giving him a buff, along with his W giving a buff. Is a lot of damage. He can cancel his auto attack a million times, stun you, and have a ton of resistance without having to build resistance. Arguably one of the best top laners. Kled is probably up there with Jax in terms of dueling power because of how much he can attack in a single second. Add that with press the attack and his W, and Kled can crush basically anyone who doesn't have tons of resistance. And talking about crush people with no resistance, we have Rengar. It is almost impossible to win laning phase against a really good Rengar because he can jump from the bush at level 3, full combo you, and you will probably be dead. Later in the game, it's essentially the same thing, and for some reason they decided to buff his ultimate. So later in the game, you'll just see the Rengar icon above. If you're an ADC, you're gonna die. If you're not an ADC, you're still probably gonna die. So just hope that Rengar doesn't know how to combo well. Then we have Quinn. So Quinn could probably be lower in this list, but I have her S+ because of her potential. I played a few games with Quinn, and she's not super difficult to play. She's actually pretty fun. Her laning is not extremely good against other ranged champions. If you're going, let's say, Quinn versus Jace, Jace might be able to just completely destroy you. But if you're going against some other OP tier champions like Darius, Garen, and other bruisers who are relatively mobile, you can crush them because of your E and your Q. Her late game is really good, especially against ADCs. You can cancel this fucking mic, I swear to God. You can cancel those stashes with her E, and her Q is a really good blind. It's almost the best blind in the game in comparison to some of my Teemos. Better than Graves, definitely. Fiora, Grand Duelist, enough said. She can basically solo anyone in the game as long as she can parry properly. Percent true damage, that's all I really need to say. Shaco is a really good jungler. His clear is not the best. It's pretty good though, especially for the health that he has at the end of it. Speed-wise, it's not the best though. His ganking is really easy because he goes full invisible and you can't really detect that. And later in the game, he can shred most targets. Warwick is probably the easiest jungler in the game to play. I guess Nunu now would be easier than him, but point still stands. Tanky, high damage, easy to gank. Probably the best jungler for low elo, still pretty decent higher elo. Rammus could arguably be an OP tier, but I'm gonna have him S+ anyways. Probably the tankiest guy in the game right now. High damage, really easy to gank. I think he's one of the best junglers. Graves is also up there with Rammus and Warwick. A lot of people put Graves into higher tiers, but I don't feel like he's in that position. Graves does a lot of damage. He's pretty tanky if you can stack up your E really well. And he has the potential to nuke most people later in the game. But I don't feel as though he has as much impact as other people would. Kayn recently got buffed, so I have him up here at S+, but I had him here anyways beforehand. his Darken form transformation is probably one of the best dueling junglers that you can play. Besides something like, I guess, Camille or Jax if you play him in jungle for some reason. Uh, the sustain you have with your passive, along with the CC you have and the healing you have, it's pretty insane. Darken Kayn has a lot of potential to destroy the other bruisers in the game, and he still does a lot of damage to squishy targets. Then we have Irelia. Irelia is cancer in basically every stance of the word. They recently buffed her Q on minions, meaning that she can one-shot your caster minions early on into the game, setting her up for her E. Speaking of her E, the thing lasts extremely long. She can place it behind her, and about 3 to 5 seconds later, she can cast a second one and stun you with it. Her W is extremely good early game because it blocks most damage from other champions. So if someone like, let's say, Talon wants to one-shot you, you just press your W, and most of his damage gets destroyed. Irelia also does a lot of damage to squish your targets, as she can use her ulti to completely disarm you, so if you're playing Jhin, you're going to be screwed. She disarms you, then she hits you with her Q, stun, Q, Q, and then she just auto-attacks you to death, because her auto-attacks are also really strong when she has her passive. Xin Zhao probably should be lower on this list, but I still feel like he's up here in S+, because of how easy he is to gank with in early game. His damage is pretty strong with his W, his knock up, and his Q is really good, especially if you have Phase Rush to proc it. It's almost a secured gank if you see this guy enter your screen. Zed is probably one of the strongest mid laners in the game for soloing people. Maybe Talon could do better, or other champions like Kali could do same damage. But later in the game, Zed is a monster, and you can't really duel him well unless you outplay him. But a good Zed player can destroy basically anyone in the 1v1. Vel'Koz is in a similar stance where he can beat a lot of people in a 1v1 situation. His passive is extremely underrated for how much damage it really does. If he reaches level 6, he can kill basically any mid laner as long as he gets his passive proc because of the true damage that it does. And later in the game, his ultimate is extremely good for team fights because it shreds people. And Orianna is in a similar stance where her ultimate is extremely good late game. Her laning super easy as well. Karthus has his Q, and if you have Predator with your ulti, you can one-shot a lot of targets. He always has the highest damage in the game, at least on. Yeah, damage. And then we have Draven. With Conqueror, Draven's actually really good. You get the Infinity Edge shred, and then you get the Conqueror shred, and you hit it with your Q, you get the crit, really nice chunks of damage. He's similar to Jim, but he has a lot of attack speed, so he can shred through targets easier. Xayah is only up here with Rakan. I actually have Xayah lower in the list as well. Really good damage with your W and everything else. And if you have Rakan to synergize with you, it's a lot of shred. Kai'Sa should probably be lower than S+. I'm actually going to move her right now to S. I'll talk about her later. Fiddlesticks, annoying as hell. His, like, what the fuck is it, Raven or Crow, whatever the hell that thing is. It locks onto you even if it has no vision. So if your support's really stupid and stands next to tower while you're recalling, then you're probably gonna have that thing bouncing between you guys and kill both of you. His landing is extremely easy, fear lasts extremely long, so you can basically do no damage if he maxes that first. Go in for an engage and he'll be able to disengage really easily. Late game his ulti is pretty decent but not the best. Rakan is in a similar boat as Fiddlesticks, except it's swapped. His abilities are not the best except for his W and his E, and his ultimate is the main reason you pick him up because you can charm and CC them, and then you can chain that with your W, and other people in your team can follow up on that. And he's also extremely easy to land those things because of his E and his W. Sona's super easy, spam your abilities, basically kill anyone. Aatrox is over here in the S tier because of his dueling potential. He has a lot of power, but I would argue that he's one of the more difficult champions to do all of your damage with. When it comes to something like Fiora, where you just have to hit your vitals, it's relatively simple. But when it comes to Aatrox, if you don't have your E up, you're probably not going to hit your Qs. If you can land your W on a target later in the game and it gets some kind of slow on them with either your Q or another person helping to slow, you can secure a kill. Again, with your ulti and your Q in your team fight, as long as people aren't targeting you, you should be able to dish out a pretty decent chunk of damage. Poppy's in a similar boat with him, where she can do a big chunk of damage, except that Poppy is more tank oriented, so she's not going to do an insane amount of damage, but she is going to be able to do a lot. She's also really good at engaging and forcing people to not disengage. If you're playing something that has a dash, then pop it cancel you with a W. We have Mundo over here in S tier as well. Tons of regen, tons of damage, really easy laning phase. Rumble does a lot of damage with his burn, his ulti is teamfight changing, and so is Kennen's, that's why they're up here. Cho'Gath really simple to play, good laning, good sustain, good ult. Trundle is really good at jungling, especially in whenever he builds a somewhat tanky build. He'll be able to weaken the ADC with his Q because it steals AD, good shred when he has his ultimate up, really decent pick. Jarvan has a really good ulti for team fighting, also super easy ganks, and Amumu recently got buffed. I'm actually going to put him up here in the S plus tier. Amumu, really tanky, probably the best low elo jungler. I would argue that he might be better than your Warwick. W got buffed, so now he takes less damage from ADCs. So if you don't have a lot of items built to crit, then Amumu is going to be almost unkillable. If you don't have Infinity Edge, good luck. Kha'Zix is an extremely easy jungler, but now you actually have to play around the isolation a little bit. He can jump on most people and one-shot them when he has his full build or his isolation on you. Really good assassin. Evelynn is better though. Azir, probably overrating him by putting him in the S tier, but he does have a lot of damage in his kit, especially in a later game. Late game, he can probably shred basically anyone. I'm actually going to bring Nunu and put him up here because I ordered this from top lane to bot lane. So, the new rework, I would argue, made Nunu top tier. I just have him in S just because I might be overrating him a bit. If I'm going to go over to, let's just go over to the wiki for a sec to just look at the scaling on his abilities. So, looking at his W, it has 360 damage max with 150% AP scaling, which is higher than most ultimates in the game. His Q would be 220 with 50% AP. Let's just ignore this because we're assuming you're going AP Nunu because that's probably the most fun build in the game. Snowball Barrage is 60 plus 50% AP. This is overall if you hit all your snowballs. And he has his ultimate, which is 1,275 and 250% AP. So if you're just do some simple math, his full kit would do about 500% AP scaling with over 2,000 base damage. I'd argue that that's probably the highest AP damage you can do within a single champion with scaling alone. I don't even think Veigar can match something like that. So if you hit them with your W, slap them once with your E and cast your ult, as long as they're not super fed, the shield will be enough to absorb a lot of the damage, and you'll just nuke them if the snowball doesn't kill them instantly. So they have his defense really high with his attack really low, and I guess people still play him really tanking, that's the meta, but if you go full AP Nunu, it's probably up there in terms of power with Evelynn, so I'm just going to put him in the S tier for now as they still decide which build is best for him. Echo, he does a lot of damage with his passive, he can proc it on you. His ulti does a pretty decent amount of damage, but you most likely never use it for that. You want to use it for tower diving, which is something that Echo does really well, especially in the early game with his electric proc and his passive proc. Anivia is Cancer. If she can hit you with her Q, which for some reason has a stupid hitbox because they decided to make the ability up in the air a little bit, so they can hit you from the bottom tip of it, even though it doesn't look like you're being hit. Her E can be procced at least twice in a combo if she can land her ulti on you. So she ults you, lands her Q, WE, and you're just stuck there dying. Katarina is much easier to play than Anivia, but she is easier to counter than Anivia. CC her once, her combo is screwed up basically. But she still has a lot of potential to snowball the game. Fizz is in a similar boat, where if you CC him once, you can probably kill him because he's squishy, but he can go untargetable, so you have to time that properly. His ult does a lot of damage, and his W for some reason still does a lot, even though they tried nerfing it. I have Caitlyn up in S. People would argue she's really, really low tier. I have her here because of full build Caitlyn being able to shred most targets from super long range. Really high damage. Ulti is extremely easy to land as long as people don't stand in the way. It's good for finishing off certain people, especially in the laning phase. Swain's up here in S as well. Good damage. Hasn't really changed since he got released. Lucian, I have him here because I believe there's still that bug where if you have press the attack and you proc it with your passive, it does the press the attack damage twice. So in laning phase, you can kill most people like at level 1. His late game is also really good if you can auto attack cancel, so that's why he's still up here in S tier. Bard is one of the best supports to play as AP, really fun. You land your Q, you auto attack once, and most people would die, especially if you have electrocute. Blitzcrank, you land your hook, and that's your champion. But it has a hook, so that's why he's up here. Morgana counters Blitzcrank, so she would be an S tier. Along with that, she has her 9-mile long Q. Almost impossible to miss that shit unless you suck. Nami's bubble lasts for just about the same duration as Morgana's, except she can chain it with her other ult. And her sustain is annoying as hell. Yasuo has cancer. Kaisa. Kaisa's up here in the S tier. I had her up here in S plus before, but I have her now in S. She's not super potent. She used to be a much higher glass cannon champion, but they nerfed her abilities pretty hard. So her damage is not insane, but it is probably one of the highest DPS in the games if she can sit down and auto attack you as much as possible. Probably can out DPS the other ADCs, but she also has a lot of other weaknesses that make her lower tier. Hecarim is one that most people would underrate. Hecarim's ganks are really easy. Late game he has a high amount of damage even though he is really tanky, and he has a really good jungle clear with his W, and his sustained late game against champions is really good as well because of the W. Tahm Kench is one of the better champions for support. They changed his W enough use on ally, it's like double the duration, not duration of the cooldown. So you can't just W and save people constantly, but you can still do that. His damage is really good. He can lock down most targets for a really long amount of time. And that's a similar thing with Sion. I'm actually going to move him over here because he's supposed to be a top laner, not a support. And you're a support, not a top laner, so let's move you here. And so while I'm adjusting these, let's talk about Sion. This is actually supposed to be AD Sion. I feel like AD Sion is better than the tank Sion, even people still choose to play tank Sion. So the reason I say this is because when you play AD Sion, if you play the Glacial Alchemist build people have been doing recently, you're going to do a ton of damage, and you're also going to be able to kill most people with your passive, which you usually don't think about. Where was I? Yeah. If he hits you once with his passive when he has Glacial Augment, then he can basically get the rest of his passive up, especially when he builds you almost ghostly, which most people do. Q damage is massive, all damage is even higher. Overall really strong, and he's still super tanky because of the W buffs. Now this video will go on for way too long if I wanted to go through all the other champions, even though there's not that many, but these are arguably the weaker champs. So I'm gonna leave it at here. I'll link the tier list in the description of the video. You can go check it out. And yeah, that's all.